welcome everyone to the second ever episode of In the Spotlight. Today we have with us someone who needs no introduction, so here's the shortest introduction I'm ever going to give. India's only Olympic gold medalist in an individual event. We have with us Mr. Abhinav Bindra. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
It's truly an honor. So let's sort of go back into when you started shooting and talk about your early days in picking up the sport.
Oh, well, it was a very long time ago. It's been about 22 years now. It is quite interesting on how I started getting involved in sport as a kid. I actually hated sport. I was in boarding school and I was a really fat boy, and my only real expertise the only talent that I had at that time was to miss physical education classes at school. That was really the only talent that I had. I was very unhappy in boarding school, but I used to receive a letter from my father practically every single day, which had one commonality, and which was always to try and play some kind of sport. Obviously, for whatever reason, I didn't really listen to him while in boarding school, and then finally decided to get out of boarding school. My family had shifted to Chandigarh, and I joined a day school, and post school hours, I was trying to find a hobby or trying to find a sport. Obviously, all the athletic ones didn't really suit me so well, so I went and tried to go and shoot. A family friend introduced me to my first coach, Colonel Dillon, and I went to his house for my first ever shooting session. And I came back from that shooting session with a really positive mindset, and I was absolutely hooked. I loved the sport, and I loved the sport because to be successful in my sport, I had to stand still and not move. So that was actually the real reason on why I started the sport of shooting. But of course, I got pretty addicted to it pretty early on, and one thing led to the other. The first real goal in my sporting career was to just participate in a district competition. I think that was the world meant the world to me as a 12, 13-year-old boy when I started to shoot. And then, one thing led to the other. And I already took part in my first Commonwealth Games at the age of 15. So it was a lot of work, but in the mid-90s, of course, sport in general in India had not really developed as we see the growth now. But specifically, the sport of shooting really had very little infrastructure. Now athletes involved in the sport of shooting are actually quite lucky with tremendous exposure that they get and good facilities that have been made available. But I actually started to shoot under a mango tree. That's where my first sessions used to be. But I had a lot of support from family as well. Pretty early on, from about age 13 or 14, I packed my bags and left for Germany with my mother, and I joined a shooting school at the age of 13 and a half or 14. I went there for a month or so. And then, one thing led to the other, and then just started progressing. The district goal was achieved, and then the benchmark, the grid started coming in. Then I wanted to go to the state championships, and then qualify for the national championships, and then one thing led to the other thing. But on the whole, it was a fantastic journey. It was a journey which had a few highs, a lot of lows, but that is part and parcel of sport. And I have to say that I really enjoyed that journey. I lived every moment of it. I enjoyed the whole pursuit of trying to get better every single day. That is something extremely fascinating to me. And that's just what I pretty much did. I was never a talented athlete. I never had the athleticism or balance or even the mindset to be a really top class athlete. But I did have one talent, and my talent was to work hard. And I worked harder than anybody else that I knew of. So that's what I pretty much did for 22 years, and I enjoyed it.
Yeah, I think hard work is surely one of the most important aspects of an athlete's life. And as you said, you made it to the Commonwealth Games at the age of 15 at the 1998 event. And then by the 2000 Olympics at the age of 17, you were even competing at the Olympics. So was it always about the 10-meter air rifle for you, or did you try any other events, or how was that?
Well, yes, I think the 10-meter event, the rifle event, the 10-meter event in general was the most accessible event in the sport of shooting, primarily because the equipment used is more accessible. You know, it is not a firearm. It's
Hmm.
just basically an air gun what you use. So the accessibility, etc. In those days was still tough for an air rifle, but relatively easier than getting the right equipment for the other events. So it was the easiest starting point. And then I went into it and I started with the air rifle and then just stuck to it. A lot of the other athletes actually combine a couple of more events, but I decided not to. I struggled hard enough to be halfway decent in just one, so there was no way that I could. There was no way that I could excel in multiple events.
No, you were surely more than halfway decent. Otherwise, you wouldn't have achieved half of the things you would have achieved. But you were talking about moving to Germany to a sports school, and as well as that, after that in your career, you moved to the US as well. So, how were those two experiences for you, and how did they shape your career?
Well, very interesting moments in my life. I think those experiences have been the most valuable experiences that I will continue to cherish. I think the learnings that I had growing up as a little boy. Of course, my mother traveled with me the first couple of trips at age 13 or even younger to Germany. I went to a shooting school in a city called Wiesbaden,
Yeah.
not far from Frankfurt. And there was absolutely nothing around. It was the shooting ranges normally are a little bit isolated, they're far away from the city. So I was pretty much living in the middle of a forest. And I stayed there for a month. At that time, connectivity was not the same as what we have today, doing these Instagram lives, or we didn't
Yeah.
even have cell phones. And I remember the shooting range used to be on the first floor, and there used to be a sports hostel of sorts on the second and third floor. And there were no telephones at that time. There used to be one payphone, where you had to put the coins in, and you could connect to people back home. So my dad used to call us on that payphone, and it used to ring so loud that it used to sound like a fire alarm. So my dad used to call, and I had to run down to attend to that call. But I think it taught me a lot of different things early on. At age 13, I had to learn how to adapt. I
Yeah.
think sport and life is all about adaptability. And, at an early age, I had to learn how to adapt because, I had to learn to do everything on my own quite early on. I lived in a very, very small room at that point of time, and, living in this middle of this forest could get quite lonely. It was all about adaptability. Food was another thing. As a 13-year-old boy, or growing up, just enjoying the basic Indian food, and suddenly you're off to Germany, and you need to survive on German sausages, which you might not have a palate to. It's about adaptability. It
Yeah.
was about meeting new people. It was about learning about different cultures. It was about trying to learn from different people. I think that was an important point from very early on. It was about trying to learn from experiences, and it was about trying to learn from different people. Um,
Hmm.
Even at the age of 13, I was at that shooting school, and there used to be, the German national team used to often come in, and other international teams used to come in. I had a particular coach, and I used to hear different perspectives, on what I was doing. Some things, I liked to hear because they were in line of what I was doing. Some people had different perspective. But what I learned from very early on was that it's really important to listen and to absorb. Many a times in sport and in life, you will get advice, and that advice sometimes teases you, sometimes doesn't suit you. But more often than not, in hindsight, that is the advice which is most valuable. What I started learning quite early on was trying to develop an ability to try and just listen. I wasn't much of a speaker, but I was a good listener, and that is what I was. That is what I tried to do, and that is what I tried to pretty much learn early on. And yeah, but it was about experiences. It was about just gaining basic knowledge, because at that time we did not have that basic knowledge in India about the sport, about the various techniques, about the foundation, which is so important in sport. That wasn't particularly available back home. So it was about trying to learn. Of course, I went to the US much later on. I think that was after the Sydney Olympics. I would live there for 4 or 5 years. Those were tremendous years for me, because I grew up in a generation where we were a lot which was relatively tentative, not your generation, which is full of confidence and which is full of belief. We were the chicken-hearted ones, or at least I was the chicken-hearted one. The sissy one who was always scared. Not unlike all of you who have that confidence from pretty early on. But the experience in the United States was very valuable to me, because I lived in the US Olympic Training Center in Colorado Springs. You had several athletes of different disciplines wake up every morning with the same goal and, with the same intensity, with one goal in mind, and that was to be their best at an Olympic Games. And that was an environment which was just fantastic to be in. And you've lived in America as well. I know you study there, so I think in America people are born just to believe, and just to believe that they're the best in the world from day one. So that was the environment at the training center, and that really helped me, because I was somebody who lacked confidence. I was somebody who lacked a great degree of self-belief, and just being around people who had that positivity and who had that element of belief was very valuable to me, because it rubbed off on me as well to a certain degree.
So that environment surely played a big role in your career. And something that I think everyone would love to know about is, what exactly were you feeling the night before the 2008 Beijing Olympic gold that you won, and sort of how do you prepare for such big events and high pressure?
I think you can't prepare for that pressure. I think the night before was nothing but a panic attack. It was full of anxiety. I think I barely slept, and the competition in itself was a controlled panic attack. I think what you will learn in sport, I think there may be a larger audience in your feed today which may not be sports people. But several people will face pressure in life. And I think the understanding that you can't get away from it is very, very important. I think acceptance of the situation is very important. Acceptance of the situation that there will be pressure, and just trying to absorb it. It is not a pleasant scenario. It is not something that you can necessarily enjoy, that feeling of pressure, etc. But if you learn to accept it, you'll just learn to work with it. I think that is the most critical thing. I think when we are under a pressure situation, what we naturally as human beings tend to do is that we start to resist it. We don't like this feeling and pressure, and we try and fight it, and we try and we have to find relaxation, and we need to now relax. I think that is the biggest mistake you can make. I think what is important is, if you're in a pressure situation, if you're in an uncomfortable situation, just say yes, just accept it. And the moment your mind accepts it, it will find a way to work with it. I think it is about finding a way to work with pressure rather than resisting it. I think the biggest mistake what you can do is resist that situation, resist that pressure. You have to just basically accept it. It's not necessarily the most pleasant feeling, but I can assure you it won't kill you. So it's about enduring it. It is about just accepting it and working with it.
So
And
accept. Sorry.
I think it is also really important to understand that, a training environment and a competitive environment are two different worlds, and they will never be the same. I mean,
Yeah.
you can never recreate the feelings, the internal volatility that you will face in a competitive environment. You can never recreate that at a home environment or in a training camp or in a training environment. So it is about accepting that pressure. It is about accepting the situation, accepting the fact that there will be pressure in a competition, and you'll start to learn to work with it. And you have to understand that you will never have an ideal scenario. I
Right.
think many athletes make the great mistake of trying to create an ideal scenario at home, an ideal scenario where they can be the best, their best. But the fact is, when you go to competition, there will be no ideal scenario. So you actually have to work to be perfect on an imperfect day, because there will be something that comes up which you haven't factored in. There will be a certain element of luck in sport which you have to factor in. There would be a certain element which you may have not thought of, and some crisis. A crisis is always around the corner in sport, and you have to be flexible enough in your mind to accept those challenges, and that is what really dealing with pressure is all about.
Right. So I think something that's really come out of this is sort of the acceptance of really the difference between training as well as competition, but also the acceptance of pressure. And could you shed some light on what exactly you used to do to sort of handle that, or is there any one thing that sort of helped you? Because I think everyone has their own way of handling pressure.
I think it is important for me. What was really important was to be really process oriented. I think what we tend to do is, and it's just human nature, we base our happiness and we base our feelings and we f- on a certain outcome. We base our own happiness on a certain outcome. So as a young person trying to chase a gold medal at the Olympic Games, I am basing my happiness on the fact that I will win a gold medal at the Olympic Games, and that will make me happy. And I think that is the worst mindset one can get into, because I can guarantee you that that event is not going to get you happiness. I've experienced it. So I think it is very important to remain happy, and you can remain happy by being process oriented. You can remain happy by setting smaller goals. I think, and acknowledging those smaller goals when you achieve it. Live that journey. Don't always remain totally focused, and don't remain totally obsessed with the outcome, obsessed with the process, because it's that process which you are going to live every single day. It is that process which is going to get you that outcome. I think one of the big mistakes one can do is that you become so outcome oriented. I think for me, the most important way to deal with pressure, what your real question was to kind of learn to detach from outcomes. I was very process oriented, and I was totally invested in the process. So for me, of course, at the back of my mind, the process, the outcome was important. Of course, I wanted to have a nobody was giving me a gold medal for just being good at the process. I also had to win, but to be able to win, I had to do the process correct, and that is what I try to focus on. I also learned, or at least attempted to try and remain in the moment. I think one of the big mistakes or errors one makes is to look too far ahead, or to we get bogged down by the past, or by failure. I think it is all about trying to live in the present. And performance in sport is all about living it to the maximum in that present moment. If you're able to do that, I think the outcomes will take care of themselves on their own. I think that is the most important thing. So be process oriented, be and try to live in the moment. I think that was something which was very important to me. It's not the easiest thing to do. It's easy to say, but not easy to always put it into practice. But you have to try. I think that is what we all do, and the ones who are able to do it better are more successful. So, but you have to get onto that path. You get onto that path by living in that way. I mean, when I say that you have to try and live in the moment, it's not just living in the moment when you're playing a table tennis tournament or you're on the shooting range for a shooting athlete. It is about living life that way. I mean, if you're eating a meal, be totally focused to the meal, have mindfulness to the meal. If you're spending time with your family, enjoy those moments with your family. So that's how you build that reservoir or that experience of really living life in the moment. And I think that is something which can really help you in performance, in pressure and performance in sport.
So detaching yourself from result is something that I really picked up from what you said. And so I was actually going through some of the opening ceremonies, because that's something that many young athletes like me love watching, or even aspire to be in. And you were given the honor of being the flag bearer for India in the 2010 Commonwealth Games in Delhi, as well as in Rio. So sort of what are your experiences in opening games? Because I know a lot of viewers would like to know that, because I sort of know you have a little different view compared to what most people do. And
yes, I actually always hated opening ceremonies. But I attended the first opening ceremony at the Sydney Games, my first Olympics, and of course, I loved the adrenaline which came with it, the positivity which came with it. I think it was great. It was just fantastic to be able to march into that Olympic stadium with hundreds and thousands of people cheering you on. I think and you're representing your country. It is a great feeling which you can get. But that was nice for the first time. My first Olympics was like being a kid in a candy store, and I was enjoying all these little things. But I think at some point of time, I also had to make a decision on what was good for performance and what was tactically and strategically good for my performance. My event at the Olympics always came a day or two after the opening ceremony. And the opening ceremony is quite a tiring experience for athletes, because, the athletes have to assemble 5-6 hours prior to the actual start of the opening ceremony. You're standing for 5-6 hours. Then you actually go through that whole process of the ceremony. You hardly get to see anything because you're waiting to march in. And then you probably assemble at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and by the time you get back to the village, it's probably 2 or 3 in the morning. So it is a long thing. Of course, I had the great honor of being the flag bearer at the Commonwealth Games. It was something that I did not want to miss because it was a home games. I rarely had the opportunity to compete at home. I competed for 22 years of my life, and competed several times at home in India without any spectators. And this was one of probably the only exceptions where people actually came to watch. And it was something that I wanted to experience. Of course, the energy of marching into a stadium as the home team is something which is unbelievable. And of course, Rio was again a great honor for me. Again, it was kind of a strategic decision. It was, of course, my last Olympic Games because I had decided almost a year and a half before the Games that this will be my last game. So I was also an aging horse, and the aging horse also needed a little boost of adrenaline and a little boost, which the young one experienced in Sydney. So I think it was something which was also very nice and motivated an old athlete through marching in. Of course, I had the honor to be the flag bearer, but just experiencing that whole the emotion walking into an Olympic stadium, and it was fantastic. And although it was a little bit tiring, it was worth the effort.
Yeah. So as I can sort of understand from what you were saying, that was a really long and tiring process. So let's sort of get into some faster and more fun things. So we're going on to the rapid fire section of our Instagram live.
So
So
how
I'm
do
just
I
gonna
have
ask
to answer that? I have to answer that
as
very
soon as
soon.
possible. Yeah,
Oh,
yeah, and as
I'm
fast
old.
as
I need
possible.
time. My brain is not working so well, especially the lockdown.
Okay, so what is the first thing that crossed your mind when you realized that you had won the gold in Beijing at the
Um,
Olympics?
Relief.
Okay.
I think relief was the greatest emotion that I felt. I had invested so much emotionally into the whole journey that, and put in so much effort and
Yeah.
time into it. So relief that I was able to do it. There were several people in my life who had tremendous amount of belief in me, and I was just relieved that I could validate their belief.
Okay. What is the first thing you did when you got back home from Beijing?
I went and met my dogs. That was the
Nice,
first thing.
nice. That's personal. When was the last time you picked up an air rifle?
Oh, the last time I ever picked up an air rifle was my last shot at the Olympic Games. I've never picked up a rifle ever after. I, in fact,
That's
don't even I in fact don't even own one anymore.
oh, wow. If you weren't a shooter, what would you be?
A lawyer.
A lawyer. Okay. Your
They tend to make
favorite
a lot of money.
your favorite quote?
Um, the harder you work, the luckier you get.
Uh, the next Olympics where India would win a gold in an individual event,
Oh,
if you had
Tokyo,
to predict.
whenever
Tokyo.
it would be,
Okay.
whenever 2020, they are still 2020, Tokyo
Yeah.
2020, but will be held hopefully in 2021.
Which sport do you predict India will win its next Olympic medal in?
Shooting.
Okay. It's one of your inspirations for sure. Um, just three words of inspiration for young shooters.
Well, persist, persevere, and never give up.
Okay. So now we're coming towards the end of the rapid fire. So I'm just gonna give you three names one by one, and you're supposed to imagine that you wake up as one of them, and what exactly you would do if you wake up as them.
Oh, this is going to
The,
be hard.
the first one is Milkha Singh.
Oh, go for a run,
Okay. Michael Phelps.
go for a swim.
And I think everyone's really gonna want to hear this. What would you do if you woke up as the Queen of England?
Wear my crown.
Okay. Okay, so now we can get back a little bit to the serious stuff. I think 2004 Olympics, you had an uneven tile below you. So how did that affect you? And if you could just share something about that.
Yeah, it was a very heartbreaking experience. I had gone to the Athens Olympics in a really good frame of mind, really on top of my game. I think I've never been in such good shape, such good form ever. And I went to the games, broke an Olympic record in qualifications, and then I dropped to seventh after shooting the worst 10 shots of my life. Uh,
Okay.
and of course, at that moment, I did not know what had happened. It was my world had fallen apart, and only 2 or 3 weeks later, my coach Gabby called me after everything had calmed down, and she told me what exactly happened. Because the next day, another shooting athlete who she was coaching was also positioned on the same firing point in the final, and there when they went to set everything up, they realized that the tile was moving.
Hmm.
And then they had to change the range a little bit, etc. So of course it was something which was very heartbreaking for me. I was very bitter for a while. I think one thing which was incredible at that moment was my family support. My parents went to two Olympic Games to watch me compete, Sydney and Athens. Moments after my world had kind of had fought, and I
Yeah.
met my mother, and
Sorry.
she, the first thing she told me after this final was, the most you could have done today was win a silver or a bronze, but you're going to win a gold medal. That was the belief that she had, and it's ironical that it came true 4 years after.
Yeah.
Of course, when I came back home, I was still in a very bitter mood. I was depressed because you work so hard, you invest so much time and effort and blood, sweat, and tears into that pursuit, and then something as a freak thing happens, such as an uneven tile or a loose tile, and
Yeah.
then you can't perform. So with time, I got better. I think there was no way that anybody could help me to get my motivation back. I had to get that motivation back on my own,
Yeah.
and I had to feel that desire, and I had to feel that that need to go and shoot again from deep within myself, and that came with time. For a few weeks, I wanted to quit. I wanted to never shoot again. Those the regular emotions one feels after a bad tournament. They were just amplified a little bit because of the loose tire. But after a while, I started to miss it. I started to miss the boring and the mundane. And the boring and the mundane was to go back to training. And then one fine day, I woke up with some renewed energy, and I felt like going to go and train. And that's what I did, and that's how I restarted. And again, however, I talked about that detachment a little bit earlier in our conversation, and
Yeah.
that detachment that was actually born out of this experience, because going into Athens, I was so outcome driven. I was so driven by the fact that I want to win a gold medal at the Olympics, and it was all about outcome, outcome, outcome. And the experience in Athens told me that you can do everything in sport. You can do everything, but there you only have one guarantee, and that one guarantee is that there is absolutely no guarantee for success. Sport can never be scripted, and all what you can do is go out there and put in your best, and put in your best not just while competing, but in preparation. I think that to me was the most important thing. Going into Beijing, it wasn't important if I would win a gold medal or not, really. And I'm being
Yeah.
extremely honest with you today. What was important to me was how I prepared for the games. And when I before going into the game, going to Beijing, I looked myself into the mirror and asked myself the brutally honest question that have I done everything in these last 4 years to prepare for the games to the best of my own ability? And the answer was yes. And that made me immensely proud of myself. And in my eyes, I was already a winner before I took the first shot at Beijing. So it was all about doing everything right in preparation, in that process. And yeah, the Athens experience really taught me how to try and learn how to detach from outcomes.
Yeah, so that's actually a very compelling story about how you sort of detached from results as well as came back from a really tough time, and that I'm sure helped you like give you closure in some sense that when you wanted to retire. So now we can probably talk about some things other than shooting. While this was still during your shooting career, you published a book in 2011, A Shot at History. I think that's something that very few people have done. So how did that exactly come along, and what did you feel?
Yes, I think for me it was almost I think the inspiration or the desire was to share my experiences with people. I think that was something important to me. I think sometimes successful athletes are often people often have a are very misinformed about how elite athletes are, or how they all feel that these elite athletes are superhuman beings. But the fact is that, even the best of athletes are vulnerable. The best of athletes, have their self-doubts, have their limitations, which they try and overcome. And I wanted to give a very honest account of what I did, of how I felt, of the fact that I was vulnerable, the fact that I was anxious, the fact that I was flawed, the fact that I was just ordinary. I was an ordinary person who worked hard. And that was exactly what I wanted to communicate to the wider audience. And that was where, I was very fortunate to have a great co-author in Rohit Brijnath, who I believe is one of the finest sports writers in the world. And I really enjoyed the whole process of doing this book. We spent countless hours together. We exchanged, I think, thousands of emails in this period of publishing this book. And it was almost, a therapeutic exercise for me because, till that point in my career, I never patted myself on my back for the small achievements that I may have had, or the small accomplishments that I may have made, even in training or even overcoming certain challenges, because we are always focused to the big thing, and that always we tend to forget the small things. And just the whole process of doing this book gave me that opportunity to look back, gave me that luxury which athletes generally don't have, to look back a little bit. And it was, for me, very therapeutic, and I really enjoyed doing this book. Of course, the book has been updated a couple of times, and the latest version, of course, closes the whole loop and carries my Rio experiences as well.
And after Rio, you were also given a big honor for an Indian actually to be on the International Olympic Committee's Athlete Commission. Can you tell us about what exactly it does and what exactly you do there, as well as what we can sort of hope in terms of Tokyo 2020?
Well, I think the IOC's Athletes Commission is the bridge between the athlete world and the administration, which is the leadership which looks after the Olympic sport and the Olympic movement on its whole. It's about creating awareness for athletes. It's about athletes' rights. It's about doing things for athletes' well-being. It's about communicating what athletes want, and it's about ensuring that the athletes remain in the heart of all decision making. I think that is basically what the role of the IOC's Athletes Commission is. It is a very powerful commission in the Olympic movement because there are about 18 members on that commission, and there is representation from the IOC's Athletes Commission on each and every IOC commission, and there are about 20 or even more IOC commission. So an athlete representative sits on every commission. So an athlete's voice is on the table at every forum and at every decision-making level. So which is very, very good to see. I have personally, in this period of a couple of years, been involved in a couple of projects. One being on athlete mental health. That is something which I am deeply passionate about. I think we are always so focused as athletes on performance and mentally getting stronger and mentally being good performers, but nobody really talks about the well-being of athletes. We may be athletes, but we're also human beings, and human well-being has to be at the heart of high performance. I think that is something which the wider community tends to forget. Even the entourage sometimes is under so much pressure for results. Coaches are under so much pressure for results. Athletes are also under pressure for results, that we sometimes lose the human element to the whole pursuit. And I think it is firstly the foundation of performance is actually the well-being element. I mean, if we are mentally in a good shape, if we are mentally happy, if we are mentally balanced, I think is the most critical thing. And that's what we've been trying to do on this subject. We've done a lot of work in the last year or so, trying to create trying to create a lot of awareness for on the subject, because it continues to be something which is highly stigmatized, especially in the athlete community. I mean, even in the wider community, it is still extremely stigmatized. But in the athlete community, it's almost as a sign of weakness. But in reality, it is not. So it is about creating that awareness, breaking the stigma down a little bit, and then, of course, creating resources for athletes. So we are in the process. We've already brought out a lot of resources which are available on the Athlete 365 platform, which is the IOC's platform for athletes. You can just sign in and have access. Athletes of any level can really have access to a lot of top class information, and mental health is another important aspect. Of course, a toolkit is being another element of the mental health work is that a toolkit is being prepared for athletes, for sports organizations, which then can be implemented at different levels. Because I think if we have to deal with this subject, it is about creating the right environment. It is about creating that right environment very early on. It is about educating athletes on creating a degree of balance in life very early on. Because, sometimes we leave it too late, and if we miss that bus, then I think it is too late. So my work has really been extremely focused on this subject. Different members of the commission are actively involved in different works. Of course, we have several video calls through the course of the year. We meet a couple of times. In fact, I have a call right after your Instagram live today. So it's a very active commission trying to do the best for the wider community.
Nice. I actually just saw a comment. I think your dad is here. So hello, uncle. Best wishes to you. Hope you're doing well and safe. So I think you're also trying to help a lot of young Indian athletes through something that has helped you a lot, which is high performance analytics. So if you could talk us through the ABTP program.
Yes, I was somebody who really leveraged on sports science, and somebody who is very interested, who really used the whole aspect of science into better performance. Those were facilities, and that element was actually lacking in India and continues to be something which needs work on. So I was fortunate enough to have access to a lot of scientific backup from centers across the world. We talked about my time in Germany. We talked about my time in America, and incorporating the element of science in preparation, whether it be technical preparation, whether it be mental preparation, whether it be physical preparation, whether it be the medical side of it, was something very, very critical for me to get better as an athlete. I also was somebody who had injuries through my career, and I could not necessarily find the best expertise back home to deal with those situations in the best possible manner. And I always had to travel overseas to get hold of to get better. I think trying to go and train overseas is nice, but it is always a plan. We're always going to remain kind of a plan B, because at the end of the day, you come back, you will come back home at some point, and then when you're back home, you don't have access to those facilities. So the idea was to bring all that science and cutting edge science, the best practices which I experienced myself in various centers across the world, and bring them to India. So I started my first center right a couple of months after the Rio Olympic Games. And of course, these centers act as high performance centers for athletes, but also as medical centers, medical rehabilitation centers for the wider community, people with pain issues, or people with coming out of orthopedic or neurological surgeries or issues. So we bring in a lot of science, a lot of technology for the athletes itself. My foundation runs a program called the STEAM Scholarship Program, and I think we have about 60 odd athletes under that program, where we give access to these facilities. The STEAM Scholarship Program stands for science, technology, engineering, analytics, and medicine, and we try and incorporate all those elements into grassroots level training. For me, the most important element is providing these cutting edge facilities to the grassroots level, because it is very hard for an elite athlete to suddenly incorporate different new things into their training. Although it is something which I continue to do till the last day of my career. If somebody told me that even I could get a 1% edge or 0.5% edge on something, and I had to climb a tree or jump or down or climb down a well, I would do it. But some athletes resist it, and I understand that. I understand that mindset. Some coaches at the elite level also resist the use of science because they have their certain way and their certain framework which they believe works well for them, and then they like to stick to it. But I think for us to really succeed on a higher level, we can't ignore the scientific aspect of it. So what I'm trying to really do is to incorporate it into the grassroots level. By doing that, I hope to achieve a bigger change in the whole ecosystem surrounding sport in India. So when a 12-year-old athlete is exposed to things like VO2 max or training or the best cutting edge recovery methods, when they go to the elite coach when they are 20, and the elite coach doesn't know what the young kid is talking about, that would be a real progress. So it's not just about educating athletes. What we are trying to do is also educate the larger ecosystem. So also coaches, we try and incorporate all of them into the whole process. So just trying to do my bit, which I believe is an important element, and also trying to help the wider community with their medical needs.
Indeed, and in fact, Dr. Digpal also just commented on the live. So thank you for being here as well. And I think we have only a few minutes left until this Instagram live sort of gets cut. But there's also a biopic now getting made on you. So is there any chance we're actually going to see you playing yourself and see you on screen?
No, that's not going to happen. I know the team is hard at work trying to get a script together. I don't know what the real film would look like. I imagine it will be a loosely adapted version of my book. If you want, which I'm absolutely all right with, as long as the spirit of what I did and the spirit of my pursuit remains alive, which would be nice to see. But there is no way that I am going to make any role, I will not be in the film. No chance of that happening.
And also something interesting that
I don't even know if I will go and watch the film.
Of course you will. Of course, at least all of us will for sure. But something that I've tried
to.
Yeah, no, but I think something that I've sort of tried to do with these lives is get sports people to ask the next speaker a question. So Satyan from last session had a question as to, if anything, what changed right before and after you won that Olympic gold?
Well, I think what changed before the Olympic, just before going into Beijing, I think I took that leap of faith. I think that was very important. And I took that leap. How I was able to take that leap of faith was by answering that question that I already did. And that was to really look myself in the mirror and ask myself that question: have I done everything in my human capacity to be best prepared for these games? And the answer was truly yes, and it came from deep within. And that allowed me to take that leap of faith. That allowed a person who struggled with self-belief, that allowed a person whose constant companion was self-doubt, to be able to take that leap of faith. So it was for me all about the fact that I had done all that I could. So that was that one thing that changed, and I was able to make that change because of the fact that I had done everything humanly possible to actually prepare for the Olympic Games, and in my own capacity to be the best version of my own self. And I think that is the most important thing in life. You can only do the best that you can, and put your best foot forward, and hope for the best. I think that is the nature of sport. After the games, obviously, with to be very honest, a difficult moment of my life, because for 16 years at that point of time, I had dreamt of one goal, and woken up trying to pursue that goal, and one fine day that goal was achieved. The medal that I had was in my pocket, and then suddenly I was left goalless. So that also created a certain void in me. And again, it took understanding. You had to learn to deal with success. I think that that is also a very important factor. I mean, we often talk about dealing with failure, but I personally feel that dealing with success is much harder than actually dealing with failure. So both have a little bit of a crisis, but as long as you manage them well, I think you can deal with them.
Indeed. So here's announcing the next speaker on this series. We're going to have the face of Indian women's table tennis, Manika Batra, on. So if you could just ask her a question, please.
Well, I need to think a little bit. Well, I'd like to ask her, I mean, what is the single most, or what are the couple of elements she believes would be the most important elements that will bring her success at the Olympic level, at the Olympic Games? So what does she believe she needs to do? Which are the elements that she need to put effort into to maximize her chances on achieving Olympic success?
Okay, great question. I'll surely ask her that. And we're just going to end this live now, but I wanted to sort of thank everyone for joining in. And I'm going to be doing a giveaway. So actually, if you could ask them a question about yourself, and whoever gives the first correct answer will get a gift. So if you could just ask them any question about yourself.
About myself?
I mean, some result or an achievement or anything, just to reward everyone who's been on the live the whole time.
Nobody might get the answer. Okay, which year did I break the junior world record for the first time?
Okay, guys, to everyone watching, which year did he break the junior world record for the first time? Let's hope some answers come in soon. Do you want to give them any hints, maybe?
It was an Olympic year. Oh, she got it. Somebody got it. 2000.
Yeah. 2000, Nidhi Jain. Okay, right, perfect. It's been an honor to have you on the show. It's been an honor to have you on the show, and we need many more athletes like you in India, especially as well as the rest of the world. And yeah, just thank you for joining us and inspiring and motivating all of us. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.